All right, all right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the broker update for the month of April. Um, Crazy to think that we're already here. We're already one quarter down for 2021, especially as slowly as 2020 progressed. Well, in my head anyway. But so we're first quarter down. Some pretty huge numbers from my home group. We did our volume, our transaction count, everything was up. So it's shocking to see the number of transactions we did with the limited amount of inventory that was out there. We made jokes in the broker department. We just don't know where people are finding these houses to sell. But I mean, we're finding them. So the number one thing on my list for today to get out there is the new commission instructions process. We are no longer requiring the commission instructions in your SkySlope file. So we as brokers are not going to sign them. We're not going to sign the title ones. We're not going to sign the MHG ones. If the title company really, really, really is bugging you for one, you can send one in, but just let them know that it's preliminary. And the new process, and the reason why is because we have this new system, the My Agent Portal, that I'm sure and I hope that everybody's very familiar with at this point. That's where we create the commission disbursement authorizations. And we're already asking you, when you create a file in SkySlope, we're already asking you, it's a requirement to input all the commission information there. So we felt like it was redundant for us to ask you to do it there, us to sign a commission instruction, you send out a commission instruction, and then on top of that, we sent out a commission disbursement authorization. So what the new process is and how we want you guys to handle it is to input everything into the commission tab on SkySlope. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Is there a TC? Is there a team split? Is there a gift? Is there a concession? Is there a change in the commission that would be listed from the time you inputted that file to the time we're going to close it out 5 days prior to COE? Is there any changes? And if it's correct there, we'll send out directly, my home group will send out a commission disbursement authorization to the escrow officer 5 days prior that will have all the breakdown, everything, how to pay you, if you're getting paid, if we're getting paid, however that's going to work out, however you requested or wherever you are in that process with your file. And we don't need commission instructions. We're going to send it out. So it takes a step away. You don't have to send anything out to us to sign. The effective date, I'm saying that you could still send them to me because I know we're getting this out there. But as of May 1st, I will kick everything back, and anybody who's sending anything to me, I'm sending out just a little quick email like, hey, we're not requiring this any longer. Here's why. Here's what to do. So as of right now, we're still processing them, but May 1st is our drop dead date, and we're just no longer gonna sign them at all. So that's that. Todd, do you have anything to add to that before we move on from that topic? I know it's a big topic. Todd, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Behind the scenes, Kelly's kind of working to put up the video that is now at the pegged to the top of the My Agent Portal, Broker Sumo, and I believe it went out yesterday. I just added a couple screenshots that I think were from that video that is still in process, so to speak. We're renaming the commission instructions, line in the checklist to commission confirmation, commission review. I mean, if we got a new name for it, there's still going to be that process of reviewing the commissions to make sure when the CDA goes out at least 5 days prior to closing that there's a chance that it says, hey, here's how the money is being allocated. That's what we want it to be. If for some reason it didn't say that or something was missing, we have a day or two to correct that. We don't have 5 days to correct it. We have a day or two to correct it. We aren't going to be in a situation where at Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, hey, I forgot to put in the TC fee. Any chance of, that's not going to be able to be processed that quickly. But, we'll break it down. I'm going to record a couple of videos today, I think, to break that process down further as a follow-up to what yours said that laid out the overview. It's going to be a little bit more specific on the steps, so I won't want to burn up this valuable time right now on that.
So Doug, I see you have a question about the gifting commission. So gifting commission, commission reduction, stuff like that, where you're giving a credit to a buyer or seller, those still need a broker signature and authorization. Anything that changes the amount, the total amount that's coming to my home group needs broker authorization. But what we don't need is, if you're getting 3% and nothing's changed and it's 3%, we don't need you to send that in to get signed. So everything else, commission reduction, gifting, we have created those documents. Those documents are in the My Agent portal. We have new documents for that we will still sign. It's just the actual commission instructions no longer need to be signed. Anything else, and if you change that, if you gift that, we understand that things happen right up to close of escrow. You input that into the commission tab in SkySlope, and like Todd said, if we have time to, we will update that to reflect a direct cut or a direct payment from title. But if we don't, it's just going to come to my home group and it'll get paid out normally. So it's just a change in the process. It's not a change in how we're going to do business. It's just a change in the process of how we get from A to B. That's it.
Yeah, if we back up, to, I don't want to say 10,000 feet, but if we back up a little bit, the goal is to expedite the process, that when you get, let's just say COE is Friday, and Monday morning, our commission disbursement authorization, which is what we call a disbursement authorization. That's what every broker has one. They call it different things: order to pay, commission disbursement instructions, whatever it is. But a DA essentially is going out Monday. And if all our ducks in a row, our files complete, maybe except for the walkthrough document, which we're working on, it's going to say pay the agent X and pay my home group Y. And maybe there's a Z component of some sort, TC or whatever that would, client credit, whatever that would be. If it doesn't, the file's not complete. We can't just hold up the show. It's going, and it's going to have to say pay my home group all the money. And we're going to have to do some, check cuts afterwards. There'll be an opportunity, because SkySlope is being programmed to email you 10 days prior to closing with an update on where you're at on your file. It's probably still a required item or two. Get them in. It's going to get another one 7 days prior to closing. Hey, here's your file. There might be something outstanding. Get it in. Review the commissions. If we do all that a week prior to closing, closing's a week anyway. Some of you saw the video I recorded last week on that subject. Closing's a week, not a day. If you do all that, it's going to go out, say pay the agent. If not, 4 days prior to closing, you're going to get a third reminder from SkySlope. Man, here's the time to wake up. If anyone dozed off, and get it in, there's still time to revise the CDA and say, go from paying my home group all the money to paying the agent and my home group the fee. And we'll do those videos again to break that down a little further. But essentially, that CDA has got to go out 5 days, at least 5 days before. Closing's a week, not a day. So your goal is to have your file complete 1 week prior to COE.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to do, guys. We're trying to streamline the process, get everybody paid quicker, get everybody paid that can be paid or that wants to be paid from the escrow company. Make sure that process is complete, the file's complete. And as Todd said, we're revamping our system. We're revamping how SkySlope communicates with you guys. It will be sending out a 10-day notice instead of, I think right now it's programmed to go out 3 days, which doesn't really help, but a 10-day notice of everything, you're a complete snapshot of your file, what's been approved, what's still required, and what has been reviewed and maybe needs a correction. So if there's anything that comes up on that 10-day email, that's the time to reach out. If you haven't corrected something, or if something's required that you don't think should be required, that's the time to email brokers@myhomegroup.com and say, hey, take a look at this file. I don't understand why. I don't know what this is, or whatever the case may be, so that we can work on it and we have time. And it's not a huge fire drill the day that you're closing your file. So that's kind of what that process is going to look like. Does anybody have any questions on that specific process, comments, concerns, anything that we can address right now while we're talking to you? No? Okay.
I hear you.
Oh, there he is. Hey, John.
Hey, John.
I can hear you and speak to you through my new hearing aids that have been in my ear for 15 minutes. It's the coolest thing ever. I can literally hear and speak through the damn hearing aids. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
What the hell did he just say? So I'm a happy man.
Wow.
Jennifer, I see on your comment. So yes, I guess it depends on what it is. If you're my home group's received, if the MLS says 2.5% and we're only getting 2, we would need to sign off on that. If you're gifting the buyer $500, yes, we would need to sign off on that. If you're if there's some kind of commission reduction to make a deal work, the appraisal came in low, whatever it may be, and you're crediting to make the deal happen, yes, we need to sign off on that. If it's just everything's standard commission instructions, no, we don't need to see that. If it's 2.5% and you're getting 2.5%, that's it. We don't need to see those commission instructions any longer. So hopefully that clears up the confusion. It's just for anything that needs to be changed, anything that a buyer needs, seller needs, or a broker. I mean, if I tell you, hey, I'll accept 2, but the MLS is 2.5, as a broker, I want to see that sign off from the other broker saying that they're accepting that, because otherwise we're obligated to pay them 2.5%. So that's kind of where that is. Okay, so the thing that I want to get to first and foremost, and I know it was on a couple people's radar on their list of questions, is appraisal verbiage. Appraisal verbiage. So this probably is the number one thing that we have right now making the phone ring. I have a buyer wrote in the contract, we agree to pay $5,000 over appraised value if the appraisal comes in low, up to purchase price. And the question always hinges on, okay, what if it's 10,000? What if it's 20,000? Is the seller obligated to lower the price? It's been, I think I've called the AAR legal hotline 6 times about this situation now. And every single time the answer is, depends on what it says. But the verbiage that I just said would not obligate the seller to lower the price, okay? Would not. In their head, okay? And I asked very clearly yesterday, I said, hey, has there been any change to this? Has this gone in front of a judge? Has a judge gave an opinion that would change AAR's stance on this? And that answer is no, it has not gone that far. So their opinion, my home group's stance on this. So if you call the brokers, anybody you talk to, John, Todd, anybody you talk to is going to give you the same exact answer. Depends on what the verbiage says, but likely not going to obligate the seller unless it says buyer and seller agree. Purchase price to be appraised value plus $5,000. Something in that realm. Then we can get it back for you. But you got to remember, that's just our opinion, right? That's our opinion. It's not going to make Joe Seller go down to the escrow company and sign off on his documents. It's not going to make our buyer pay that extra money that they may not want to pay. So it's going to be, that's our opinion. That's how we think it'll play out, right? But we can't make anybody do anything. So if the seller decides, hey, you know what, it's $20,000 less, I didn't really understand the verbiage I was signing. My agent, who's not my home group, hopefully, didn't explain that very well to me. And I'm not going to sign that document. Now, what happens then? Well, you know, unfortunately, I can make a call to the other broker. John can make a call to the other broker. Todd will make a call to the other broker. We'll have a nice civil conversation with them about the obligations the seller has, what we feel the obligations the seller has. And then it's at that point, if the seller still says no, the buyer, you know, that's when we talk to give out our attorney list and say, here you go. This is your next step if you feel strongly and want to pursue this. Todd, go ahead. I saw you had something.
Well, yeah, I just added to the chat as we've been going along. You know, I'm adding a video, the video you recorded about commission instructions, maybe an illustration or two. And along this line, I recorded a video a week or so ago about the the appraisal contingency issue that's been obviously making the phone ring for the past several few months or more. And as a compromise to just waiving it entirely or holding out for a full appraisal contingency, especially in this market when many buyers are paying over list price, just lowering the hurdle, changing it slightly to be list price versus purchase price is probably the simplest thing. The appraisal contingency was never intended to be a price determination tool. Like the price will be, it was always just a hurdle that it needs to cross in order to support the price and the loan more than anything. And so all we're really trying to do, as sellers are really trying to do, is lower the hurdle, and they don't know how to say that. So they just say waive, and then buyers don't want to waive. So then we start getting this crazy language. Also, John had put out on the mastermind group, it just so happens right after we recorded the video, AAR came out with a draft of the new additional clause addendum. Some of you else asked about some contract forms and changes, and we're not going there just yet. But to this point, I also just attached that link, John. And it's just a screenshot of that new phrase. I guess what we're saying and what we've always said is don't get fancy in section 8A. I can hear John's classes right now. Don't get out, the pen and start writing or what the guy at Starbucks said you should put. If John didn't tell you, Andrew didn't tell you, I didn't tell you, don't write it. Look to the ACA. My favorite non-related example is when a seller wants a buyer to waive the earnest money right out of the gate. Buyers shouldn't really want to do that. They should wait till at least the end of the inspection period or ideally the end of the BINSR process. But we also have, if you look at the ACA, there's language in there about except in the case of risk of loss, that means the house burns down, or seller breach of contract. And so look to that form as language, even if you're typing it in 8A. And here's an example of the appraisal shortfall. I know John read it right away and you like it, right, John? For the most part.
I love it. I have something to say when you get done.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
This doesn't just apply to this. And anytime you're creating language, people think I'm being like condescending here. I'm not. You need to write it in such a way that a third grader could understand it and a genius could not dispute it. It needs to be maximum specificity, minimum keystrokes, but it needs to be easily understood, but written in such a way that no one, no matter how smart or slick they are or how many years they had in law school, could mess or screw with it. That's why it's so important to call us for language. Go to a contract class where they cover clause writing, because this is job security and or reason why Todd, Andrew, and John don't sleep is one word: ambiguity.
Yeah.
If it's not painfully clear, some idiot is going to dispute it. And you know what? Idiots have a voice too. And this has literally become, the more we're getting creative, which has to happen because the market requires us to play the game to win. But if you're getting creative, make sure you get it back to your mind. You're going, could a third grader understand this? And could a genius dispute it? And if the answer is yes, a third grader know the genius, then you probably did it right. And always make sure to take care of earnest money. Never say earnest money non-refundable without falling by the phrase, except for in the event of breach or non-performance by the seller. Because we literally had a seller that lied on the spuds and the buyer tried to cancel at the end under spuds and earnest money was non-refundable. We won that, but had that been written better, we would not have had that argument. So third grade language that couldn't be disputed by a genius. That's my input for today. Avoid ambiguity. We like the job security, but we keep having the same conversations over and over. In a lot of cases, everyone was wrong. And that's the worst place for a broker to be.
Well, John always says desperation leads to litigation or something like that.
Welcome to 2021.
And to add to that a little bit, I would just also say one of the things he mentioned there was, when there's ambiguous language in the contract, sometimes if push comes to shove, it also comes down to who wrote that language. There is some provisions out there in contract law and in a court system that who wrote that ambiguous language. So buyers that are writing that in and writing that wrong are going to be held to the consequences when no one can decide. Andrew and I talk about Judge Wapner all the time, and that is a factor. But in another thing that came up when John was talking was Andrew and I were talking the other day about run it through the extremes test. Didn't you say that? Did you say, I don't know if you said that in your video. I think I said that in my video. When you put in there, the buyer agrees to pay X, well, what if it comes in 50 above? I mean, pretty unlikely in this market. The appraiser's never wrong, right, John? But what if it's 50 below? Are you saying that you think the seller's agreeing to sell it to you for 45 below list when you're offering 25 over? Like, that would be crazy. Run the extremes test.
That's perfect, Todd, because that's exactly what I think his name's Rick Mack, right? The director of the AR Legal Hotline. So I talked to him for quite a bit yesterday on as we become good friends, because I keep calling him about this kind of stuff. But that was his point, was the language and how you write it matters. And a judge, if it gets that far, is going to look at who wrote it, and they're not going to let the person who wrote it be the beneficiary of ambiguous language.
Right.
That's just how we need to look at it. So if you write it ambiguously, and then all of a sudden the seller is obligated, you think the seller is obligated to sell you his house for $35,000 less than what you got the purchase price, and they have 15 other offers, like it's just not going to end well. They're not going to look at that and be like, oh yeah, you got them. Great job, you got them. They signed off on this ambiguous language. It's not going to play out that way.
Right.
So
The long-standing legal
specify
precedent.
what the
You
seller has
cannot
to do.
benefit from your own ambiguity.
Right.
You can't benefit and the other party be damaged because you wrote language that may have served you, but may not have. If it's not clear, and you shouldn't, because otherwise people would be deliberately and intentionally, and Andrew and I, a couple of weeks ago, thought we probably ran into one of these. They deliberately made it confusing, hoping to win. And
Yeah.
you know who won? Nobody. It turned into a sword fight over who wrote it right. And so that really, that's why I go back to that clarity. And Andrew keeps saying it over and over, because it really is a thing now. When the market calms, we'll go back to boilerplate and checking boxes and putting initials in, and we won't have these problems. But when the market gets crazy, people have to do creative things, and that means hitting the keyboard. And every time you type, you create risk. You also maybe create conflict with the true nature of the contract.
Great point on the market conditions. But what I want to stress here is you can get creative and you can suggest to your clients to be creative, but your client better damn well understand what your intent of that language is, better agree with the intent of that language, and understand the repercussions of that language. Because we get the number 2 complaint we get is, I thought I was good to go on my house that now appraised $30,000 less.
Right.
And now the seller's telling me that that's not what that language meant. You, my home group, said that that was how we should write it and do it. And now we look like the bad guy.
Well,
so
our first advice is always what can go wrong. Always start with here's what can go wrong, and then advise them of potentials to do it, but always start with what can go wrong. What can go wrong on an appraisal clause? It can be unclear enough, start a fight, or someone can end up paying more than they really intended, or a seller having to take less than they intended. That's the downside we have to start with, because we're legal professionals. We don't sell houses. We need to protect our client, and understanding what can go wrong is where, again, it goes back to, that's where we get our phone calls, because they did not understand. And one of the toughest jobs we have is managing expectations. And their expectations are false because we didn't make it clear. That's unfortunately on us, because they don't speak this language. This is realtorese in many cases. This is a unique legal language to most people. And it's a challenge for you. It's a challenge for us. And it's a pain for buyers and sellers, because nothing worse than having a false expectation blow up in your face. They get angry, and I can't blame them.
Well, it's funny. Most of my classes, I say exactly the same thing you just said. That's probably because I learned them from you. But we don't sell houses. We sell representation, right? That's exactly what you just said. And our product isn't properties; it's people, and people have emotions, and people make mistakes. And one of the things we were talking about yesterday was one of the arguments we were having with another broker over this ambiguous appraisal language, when we brought up contra preferentum, like carpe diem, and those other ones, caveat emptor that you've heard. We're not watching a Harry Potter movie at the moment, but that means construed against the drafter. And the other broker argued, but the buyer put something in section 8A, and the counter offer 1 said it again. So now who's responsible? Guess what? Guess who wrote counter offer 1? Andrew?
the buyer did.
The buyer wrote his own counter offer to his own offer, which doesn't even make sense. I mean, so here again, still contra preferentum. The buyer tried to write it twice, and they should be twice as accountable, in my opinion.
Yep.
Now,
we ended up working together with the agent, and out of good faith, we ended up making that deal work out, but only because the shortfall wasn't enormous. If
right.
The shortfall is enormous, this thing blows up. And I feel like this is such a negative broker update, but it's so important because it's so Rick Mack told me the AAR legal hotline rings 5 to 7 times a day with this question. 5 to 7 calls every single day from brokers throughout the state asking this question: what does this language mean? And so if you think about that, 5 to 7 times a day times 120 days, what percentage of the contracts are having a conflict? And that's just it's a huge amount of contracts that have a conflict in them. And the conflict started the day everybody signed it. The day it got signed, there was going to be it was headed towards a conflict.
Yeah.
And had we created language that was understandable, had everybody set the expectation up front, we could have avoided that conflict. And that's what I say every orientation. We can keep you out of trouble. We cannot get you out of trouble. Once it's signed and everybody's moving down the path, it's like a freight train that can't be stopped. We cannot stop it. We can maybe push you out of the way, but it can't be stopped. Go ahead, John.
May I? I'm going with one of my silly Johnisms. And it isn't, we need to practice positive negativity, which means we need to be positive that nothing can go wrong. We don't want to be problem solvers. We want to be problem avoiders. And this is John's P list. We need to practice potentially paranoid, preemptive, proactive, prepared problem prevention. How do you do that? Perfect paperwork. But we really have to think of what can go wrong and make sure it doesn't, because otherwise we are in a problem reactive world, and that's not good for anyone. So this really isn't negative. It's thinking positively about avoiding future negativity by proactively, preemptively, and prepared problem preventing, not thinking, okay, well, if it goes wrong, we'll deal with it. It's all about making sure it doesn't go wrong up front. And you'll make more money, you'll sleep better, and you'll get more referrals, because one of the problems we have is we work in a what have you done for me lately business. And if one of these things becomes a hiccup or a controversy, even if it's solved, your client might not love you anymore, and you might not get those referrals because they're going to look at it as you let it happen.
Well, and that's exactly right. And when I mentor agents, one of the things I tell them is be very careful how the transaction goes. Be very careful on the service providers you refer, because if one of those goes bad, inspection, title company, lender, regardless if it's your fault or not, guess who's never going to get a referral from that person? You. That's just, the buck stops with us. And it stops with us because we're like the project manager of the deal, right? We have our hand in every single aspect of it, even though we have no control over it. So my previous career was construction, and I was a project manager, and I had to manage all these different trades that I had no direct control over. I had de facto control over, but when stuff went wrong, the owner looked at me, not anybody else. And that's the same thing that happens in real estate. The seller looks at their listing agent, the buyer looks at their buyer's agent, and they say, what went wrong? I don't care whose fault it was. How could you, Mr. Agent, have saved me from this heartache? And that's all they're ever going to remember. And now we have people either paying more than they should. I mean, we've literally had people write in their buyer agrees to pay $5,000 over appraised value with no cap. And then it appraises for more than purchase price. Guess what? They're paying $5,000 more than their purchase price. And they're on the hook for that. And who do you think they blame for that? It wasn't the lender, it wasn't the appraiser, it wasn't the seller, it was us. It was us. So that agent had a very fun time doing that deal for making not a lot of money, because they had to make it right. So
Andrew, that's why you said project manager. It's funny you said that, because my class, financing from APP to COE, the title of the class is Working a Real Estate Transaction Using Project Manager Methodology, from the assumption we are the project manager. We're the air traffic controller, especially when you're on the buyer side. So the methodology is exactly the same. That's a great way to think. Thanks for pointing that out. My class.
It's the way I've always brought to the table, right? Because it's very frustrating as agents, because I can't make the lender perform. We can't make escrow do what they're supposed to do. We can't make the inspector show up whenever the heck we want. We can't make the appraiser show up whenever we want. We can't get his contact information and make sure he gets our right comps and our improvements list and everything that we need to do our job. We can't make sure. We can try our best, but we have no control over that. So the only way that we avoid that finger being pointed our direction is expectations are set before any documents are signed. The language in the contract is clearly explained to the seller and buyer that we know if this happens, this happens. If that happens, this happens. Everybody understands. And the biggest one, guys, the one I can't stress enough is make sure your client is the one directing you to put that on paper. We can't ever tell them, well, if you want this house, this is what we're going to have to do. That's not going to work. It's not going to work. That's a good way to end up in litigation. So you can make suggestions. Hey, do you want to do an escalation clause? I don't ever recommend them, but if you want to, here's how it would work. Here's what it would mean. Let me know in writing that you understand what an escalation clause is, and you want me to put it in the contract. Now, that's my broker hat, right? That's my broker hat. That's what I'm telling you to do. There's the agent side of this that runs a business and needs to make money, and I understand that because I do both. But I've seen it too many times, especially in a market like this, where agents said, you have to do this in order to get this deal under contract. You have to put $10,000 earnest money. You have to make it non-refundable. And then they change their mind, and guess who's out 10 grand? And guess what the next call is? Who do you think they call next? They call me. And what do we do then? It's just one of those things, guys, where you as the agent need to understand that they're the client, they're the driver of the bus. We just fill up with gas. We make sure the tires are good to go, but they got to drive the bus.
Okay, so when there's an exception, be exceptional, right? Like anytime there's an exception, like appraisal waiver, non-refundable earnest money, any of those things that we kind of hate, but always email the client. We talk to people every day. I told him, no. You emailed him and said, hey, listen, contrary to my advice, you are suggesting you want to waive the appraisal contingency altogether. You want to reduce I can't even say waive the inspection period, guys. I can't even say those words. You want to shorten the inspection period from 10 days to 5 days. You want to, make your earnest money non-refundable at some point in the game. I can't say immediately either. I just hate that too. But then ping me back. Make this an email, please. Ping me back. Say, that's right, Todd. That's exactly what I want to do. I want this house. All right, then, check your email. Here's the form. And please don't just load that baby up in DocuSign or eSign or whatever the tool is and have them tap it on their phone on their way to Starbucks. Email it to them. Here you go. I love to double down on this. Email me back with the changes you want to make. You're the one who wins or loses depending on what we do. And man, there's no I or we in this. You, right? This is your offer. I think we got we always say this every day. Words matter. John says that every day. Andrew and I say timing's everything, all the time. Got to really play that out.
All right, guys, I'm gonna get off my soapbox here and get on to some other things that we want to talk about. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is very misunderstood section of the contract is section 2K, which is buyer changes during the process. I had a very interesting conversation with the legal hotline again yesterday and another DB, and they seem to think that changing your lender is a curable item. Changing your loan program is a curable item. Now, is it curable? No. Should you get an addendum to change the lender? Yes, that is best practices. Do you have to get an addendum to change the lender? No. Does your buyer need to understand that they are 100% at risk of non-performance now? That if they do it and they don't get prior written approval, so it literally says you need prior written consent unless it doesn't affect your ability to obtain loan approval without PTD conditions. It affects your ability to close on time, or if it costs the seller more money. Those are the three things. If it doesn't do any of those things, you do not need consent. Okay. Is it always best to get that consent just in case something happens that you can't control? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can the seller cure you for changing the lender, changing the loan program? No, they cannot.
But they can't take earnest money.
And
I've had more battles getting sellers earnest money that literally the buyer's broker screamed at me saying, that's not what it says. I'm like, yes, that's what it says. And it's always good just to do an addendum. Says the new lender will be, XYZ per the attached prequal or LSU, depending on who we're in the game. all terms of section 2 shall apply to the new lender, and you're reinstating everything in section 2. A smart listing agent wouldn't let a seller sign that. I've never had someone not. That's maximum protection for your client.
Yeah, I'll give you a
Well,
real
exactly.
simple. I'll give you a real simple example
I
on
said
that.
in, our broker email, I just said, as a buyer's agent, should you get an addendum? Yes. As a seller's agent, should you ever let your seller sign it without a little quid pro quo? No. There better be some cheddar on attached to that for me to sign anything.
Absolutely. A little quick example of that, because I've been on the forms committee with AAR since 1990, I think. Mostly the initial 10 or 20 years as a lender myself. And one of the things when we wrote that language, I remember was, from my perspective as a lender, when a buyer changes the loan program, they could make such a simple change from a 30-year fixed to a 15-year fixed. With the same lender, same conventional 80% loan, we're just going from here to there. That's a 2-minute change. It isn't going to delay the process. It isn't going to require a new appraisal. It is not going to affect closing. And that's why a unilateral notice, the notice form and zip form, I'm going to be doing a video soon on the top 10 uses of the notice disclosure form. Here's one. Hey, seller, we're switching from a 30-year to a 15-year. Won't affect a thing. Just let you know. You wouldn't even have to say that, but you could. But if all of a sudden we are switching from lender A to lender B, we're switching from FHA to VA or conventional. Oh my God. I can tell you as a lender myself that 9 times out of 10, that will delay closing. And so you better have an addendum. You better get permission, because when we say it's not curable initially. But what if you get down to the closing deadline and you didn't get permission, and now there are no docs and you can't perform? Sure, a seller could drop a cure notice for failure to close escrow 1D, but what if they drop the cure notice then on 2K? You didn't get my permission, you switched lenders, you switched loan programs, and now you're late. Now it's a problem. Now that's a problem. And I think that's what you guys are both speaking to.
Exactly. And it also goes from, I think we discussed this yesterday. If I write a cash offer and all of a sudden I want to get a loan, can I do that? Absolutely. Does any loan contingency apply to that conventional loan that I've applied for? Absolutely not. You wrote that offer cash. There are no contingencies. There's no appraisal contingency. There's no financing contingency. And you better close on that date, and you better not cost me any more money. Same thing applies there. A lot of misconceptions out there that if I write it cash, that all of a sudden I can switch to financing and sneak one in the back door. I mean, I guess technically you can, but you better damn well perform. And if you said 21-day cash close, you better be able to close that loan in 21 days, because otherwise you're going to be in deep trouble and lose your earnest money.
Well, if you think about it, the dumb part about that, here's the extremes test again. If I could write a deal that's contingent on conventional financing with 30% down, which is pretty much next to cash, right behind it, conventional heavy down is right behind cash. And we don't have the escape clause and the amendatory clause and all the federal protections on earnest money relating to appraisal contingencies. Why wouldn't everyone then write that offer, tie up the house, and then just unilaterally notify the seller? And oh, by the way, we're just kidding. We're going 100%. We're going minimum down FHA. Everyone would do it if it was allowed. And that's why the clause reads the way it reads.
And remember, cash to close, either in the form of a down payment or on a cash transaction, is not contingent. We took $10,000 earnest money last week because the people wrote, we'll pay 50 grand above appraisal. Clearly insane. And because they never thought the appraisal would be more than 25 because they only had 25. They committed to an extra 50. That number kicked in. They did not have the money and didn't think they should lose their earnest money. Well, that has nothing to do with the loan. If you don't have the down payment, you can qualify the loan with all, your job's great, your income's great, et cetera. But if you don't have the down payment, that has nothing to do with the loan or section 2. That's section 1 of the contract, and it's no different than a cash deal, cash buyer that can't come up with the cash. And these people were very upset, wrote nasty letters to everyone saying, you shouldn't have taken my earnest money. Well, they shouldn't have entered into a contract without their agent asking them, hey, if this actually goes worst case, do you actually have the money? And that's what happened.
Well, and to that to that topic, I would say what you just were talking about is I would talk about section 1C. B, I would say you just talked about 1D, right? And C, you're talking about section 2D, which is where the buyer's financing contingency does not include the funds for closing, and it does not include locking or failure to lock in an interest rate either. Those are some exceptions in 2D. I just typed something in the chat to remind you to look at 2D, and also a short video that we recorded about 1C. Show me the money, because here's the thing. If you just put down additional cash at close of escrow, buyers often think, as long as I show up with the money, it's none of your business where that money's coming from. What if you're banking on a winning lottery ticket? Do you think as a seller in this market, I shouldn't know up front that your additional cash at closing is hope pinned to a winning ticket? Because I'm not going to take my house off the market for the next 30 or 60 days. I'm not going to sign a contract I can't get out of on your hopes of winning a ticket, right? I need to know where the money is today. And that's why the correct verbiage isn't additional cash at close of escrow. It's additional available funds delivered to title prior to closing. I have the money today. What do you think proof of funds is about, right? That's what it's about.
Section 5C is very clear. The only thing buyer warrants is that they'll have the money and they will disclose any potential conflict with having that money. Buyers are losing earnest money because they just simply didn't say something up front, like they were waiting for their bonus from their 401k to kick in or whatever. They didn't make it conditional upon that. That money didn't show up, and they didn't disclose it. Therefore, they lost their earnest money because Section 5C says buyer will disclose anything basically that will affect their ability to close or potentially. And we got to make sure that we put everything on the table for our buyers, because buyers are losing earnest money over simple disclosure issues that are really easy. And I want to run with what Todd said. Remember, we manage. Our job is to manage 4 E's: events, expenses, exceptions, and expectations. And I went down the list of which one's harder. But think about those 4 E's and always say, what's happening to their money? What's happening as far as timing? What are people expecting? And is this an exception to the standard methodology and things of a regular transaction? I put 20 grand down, I borrow 80, I close the deal. Any exception to that needs to be addressed and typically calls for some sort of disclosure per section 5A for a seller, 5B for a seller, and 5C for a buyer. Memorize those parts of the contract. That's where that in 2K and 4A is where 80% of the conversations us 3 have on a daily basis are found in the contract.
I don't know if I got them in order, but I just typed those in the chat, so that's really good.
No, that's perfect. Does anybody have any questions on, there's obviously classes about section 2. There's obviously full classes on section 2, full CE classes. Does anybody have any questions on specifically 2K? That's happening a lot right now, guys, is the changes during escrow. Any little thing could change. And even on the seller side. Why? So Jennifer, you asked, is there a video explaining why we would not recommend our seller to sign an addendum? Well, so I'll just give you, Todd, that could be a good video, but I'll just give you the 30,000 mile view of why you wouldn't want to do that. Is because I guess it depends on what it is, but most times I would not advise my seller to sign it without some kind of incentive to do so, because why should I? They have a contract. They said it was cash and now it's financing. Great. I don't care, but you better damn well close. I don't want to give them any additional time. I don't want to give them any additional outs, contingencies. I don't want to put anything back into the contract that they themselves took out with their original contract. And to me, I don't think it's playing hardball. I think it's protecting your client, protecting your seller. That's your fiduciary, is to not give the buyer any more outs than they've already than what they came into the contract with. I mean, that's just to me, that's just a simple, okay, you want to change from FHA or from conventional to FHA. There's a potential that's going to take 5 more days, 10 more days. I want a per diem of $150 for every day that you miss. Plus I want you to put $10,000 more earnest money, whatever it could be, right? I mean, those are the kinds of things that would get me to sign an addendum.
It's a wait and remember, negotiation. You have set terms of the contract which you negotiated. If you're changing those terms to benefit one party, that's a new negotiation. What is negotiation? Give and take. Okay, we know what's in it for you. You're switching lenders, or you want us to agree to that. Here's what's in it for me. Since you don't get the addendum signed, your earnest money is going to be non-refundable. I will sign this, but you make your earnest money non-refundable. Non-refundable is the take from the seller. Additional time or changing is the give from the seller. The take from the buyer is having that contingency protected so they don't have issues beyond earnest money. So anytime an addendum is changing the contract, think of it as a new negotiation. You want me to give? I'm going to take. I want to give. You have a right to take. It's reworking a deal, and there's nothing negative about it. You're just representing your client, just like you do when you're trying to get the best price or get the minimum amount of repairs on a seller side.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like Todd said earlier, if you're going from conventional, great offer, 30% down, to all of a sudden to switching to FHA 3.5% down, well, baby, you just changed the entire contract, and I probably wouldn't have accepted your offer, so you better pay me for that.
100%.
You know, that's the way you do it, because to protect yourself from stuff like that, because otherwise everybody would do it.
If it comes down to a situation where a buyer or seller would say, had I known then what I know now, I would have done different, then that requires clear documentation. And because they're supposed to know everything up front to make a decision. If they would have known later and it would have changed their decision, then someone didn't disclose appropriately or document appropriately.
Yeah. Well, I think
this is stuff, Andrew. Thank you.
Saying exactly the same thing you guys said as we wrap this one up and move on, maybe to the new ER or whatever time we have left.
The new ER is next.
The key word you said was give. Anytime you give somebody, right? And just like John just said, I don't ever say I need to draft an addendum. I need to share. I need to type an addendum. You need an addendum. You need to negotiate an addendum. That's just what John just said. You want this and I want that. You want longer time to close your deal. I want stronger. Now, as a former lender, I'm not a big fan of the per diem. Sorry, Andrew, because that complicates the mix a lot with lenders trying to calculate the per diem. Yeah. I would rather see additional $5,000, all non-refundable upon executing this addendum or something. You want longer, I want stronger. You want this, I want that. Think about it this way. I don't care what market you're in. Sellers, for the most part, have always been willing to look at a little lower number in exchange for an all-cash sale. Like you said before, no Section 2, no appraisal contingency. I don't care who you are. Peace of mind is number one among most sellers, right? Most people, and they have more peace of mind from the perception that a cash deal is going to close without as many hoops to jump through as a finance deal. And so, if you made a cash offer, maybe I took less and I agreed to a shorter closing date or something else to get that peace of mind. That was a big factor. Now you want to just up and change it to something else. Hey, you got a new game plan in mind? I got a new price in mind. You got a new date in mind? I got a new deal in mind, right? So think about it that way as we move on to the next subject.
So the last thing we'll get to, another big change is the new listing agreement. Well, I shouldn't say big change, big formatting change. It's formatted differently to look like the purchase contract. And I think that was the main point. It highlights some different items that were kind of buried in the old ER that now are very clear and prominent in the new ER. Seller warranties, for example, what the seller agrees that they're going to do in the contract. They're going to provide you a SPUD. They're going to provide you an insurance history. They're going to warranty that there's no lien. All that stuff that they say they're going to do is very prominent now, whereas before it was kind of buried in the contract. So that, to me, I don't think the structure, what it says, changed all that much. But what I do think is it made it very clear, very clear to the seller to understand what they're signing, what they're agreeing to, and what they're promising us as agents, what they're promising they're going to do has become more clear. You guys have anything to add on that? Todd?
John, do you have anything?
No, and actually, the one thing you may have left out, it's now uniform statewide. What a lot of agents don't know is we were dealing with a Tucson association, Prescott Association, Mountain Association, and we are having to look for all these different things. From a broker's point of view, we love it because we only have to memorize one bunch of lines for the stuff that we review. But it's pretty cool because if you're dealing outside the marketplace, you know that what was signed there on behalf of that seller is exactly the same as signed here. And some of the smaller boards on it, that to me is just the greatest thing ever. I'm a big believer in uniformity creates better continuity in all stages. So I really, really love it. Listen, I got to run. Thank you all very much, Todd, Andrew, amazingly good stuff like every month. And I hope everybody listened because this is keep you out of trouble. This means you won't have to call the broker line because you're not going to need us because you're out there nailing it. We love talking to you, but we'd rather you never have to because that means you're kicking butt, taking names, and problem avoiding. Have a great day, guys.
Hey, John.
Thanks, Jim.
Hey, Andrew, two things on that I guess I want to add as we wrap it up. You know, number one, I've always been a big proponent of Section 11 in the old ER. You know, man, we get calls every day. Well, they don't want to assign us spuds. No doubt, no seller does, right? They don't want to call the HOA and get a list of all the fees and charges. I can't get it. You know, what do we do? No, yes, you can. They promised you they would. They promised you they would. Owner obligations. The new Section 8 is the same as the old Section 11, but it is more pronounced. We dropped from 30 sections to like 10. They've tried to pick up that formatting from the AAR purchase contract, but man, you've got to know we're supposed to be salespeople. You need to learn that sales is persuasion, and you got to persuade people by using their own words. When I took the listing and I came to you and I gave you an agency disclosure and I said I have a fiduciary duty to you, you know, you hired me. That's what they did. They hired you. The ER is an employment contract. And when they hired me, you know, part and parcel with that is to help me help you. And here's what you said you would do. You'd look into FERPTA. You'd fill out the HOA. You'd get me the claims history. You'd get me the spuds. And guess what? The minute someone came along and offered you full price, close of best, all cash, close it on your birthday or more, you signed a purchase contract with them. And guess what? You promised in the purchase contract, you would give the buyer a spuds. You would give the buyer claim, you know, so you promised me and then you promised them. So where is it? I mean, to me, that's just a seller made two promises and we got to make it good on it. And we got to fight to make good on it all the way down to the finish line. And if you can't get it then, I'm sorry, it's closing. Unfortunately, there's no direct cut. And you're going to have to call us and say, hey, now what? Well, now we talk missing paperwork. Now we talk explanations and all the other stuff to get it done. But that surely isn't a best practice. That surely isn't good risk management. And I'm positive this is negative, and I don't mean to be, because like you said, we're all here to help you. We're all here. My goal is for every file to be complete a week prior to closing, except for maybe the walkthrough document, which we never hold up a CDA or direct cut over, right, Andrew?
That's correct. Yep.
And every listing file should almost, in a normal market, should be complete before the house is even sold. Maybe not in this market where it's sold in an hour and a half, but that listing file should be complete every time before you even get to the end of the inspection period. So there'd be never really any issues why a listing file isn't 100% complete way at the beginning of a purchase transaction, and that purchase file isn't complete at least a week before. If we can get there, that's the goal. We know that's, you know, there's no perfect anywhere, but that is the goal. That's the mindset. Closing is a week. Watch the video. There's a handful of these coming out. I just try to just rip off a few every day if I can.
Does anybody have any questions on that listing contract? Because like I said, we reviewed it and they did format change it, but it says essentially the same as the old one. It's a little more clear to me. The formatting is better. The obligations are better. The commission structure is better. It's more clear to me how to write those. Does anybody have any questions for us on that real quick? No? Okay.
Andrew,
Well,
one other thing to add real quick to that is I know this has come up a few times, and it isn't just about the new form, but the new form, the new compensation section is, you know, Section 2, I believe. And it is No, I take that back. It's section 4. It's page 2. My apologies. There is another line. There's always been the gross amount due from the owner, because the parties of the ER are the owner and the listing broker. We say seller all the time, but they're really not a party of the listing agent, the listing agreement. The amount due from the owner to the broker is on line basically 39, 38, 39, 40, but there's an additional line, and we need to make sure as a brokerage, since the broker and the owner are the parties, that the total amount due from the owner is right here. We've been seeing this little add-on trailer tuck-in thing in the additional term section. That's not what that section is for. That section is for, the owner of record is John and Mary Smith, who have since moved on to a assisted living, and the court appointed their son and daughter-in-law to sign on their behalf, or please don't go active on MLS until further notice, or whatever those additional terms are. But the compensation to the brokerage, we want in section 4, page 2, line 38, 940. Is that right?
That's correct. Then, so if there's no questions on the ER, the last thing I want to add is something that has come up. Again, this has been heavy on risk management, but the last thing I'll add is something very silly that most agents take for granted, and that's the requirement in SkySlope to get either the MLS printout signed or the MLS data sheet signed. And we just had a situation where, had our agent simply done that, simply had that signed, we could have saved them, I think it ended up being like $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So because their client said, well, I had no idea that was in the listing. I had no idea that was supposed to stay. And had they acknowledged, and they said they had conversations about it. They said they told them this, XYZ, this stayed, but the seller said, nope, we never said that. We never talked about it. My first question when he called me was, did you get the MLS data sheet signed? No. Did you get the MLS printout sheet signed? No. Well, it's hard to go, like I told the brokers, it's hard to go win a fight when the guy's got a gun and I got a rubber knife. Like, how can I defend you if you have nothing signed? They don't know, I can't expect them to go review the MLS data and verify it's correct if you didn't have them sign the forms that said they did it. So it's kind of an easy thing to do. And it's like, a lot of agents think it's just, I'll get that signed whenever, I'll do it. But having them sign off on that sheet protects you from, hey, you, Mr. Agent, put down the wrong HOA fee. You, Mr. Agent, put down that this stayed and it didn't, this conveyed and it didn't. Well, I can always go back and point to, well, yes, I did, but here's your signature saying that was correct. So that way, it's not a blame thing. Is this information that I'm putting out there to the public to advertise to sell your house accurate, or as accurate as it can be at the time we did this?
Right.
So a very important kind of innocuous step to make as a listing agent, but nonetheless, it could save you a lot of heartache if you have that signed.
And that's why we want it. Hey, 2 quick things. I know we were trying to wrap this up. There was a couple of things in the chat. One was Jennifer, I believe. I will make a video on why a seller wouldn't just totally agree, to an addendum regarding Section 2K. In other words, we're not saying don't agree. We're just saying don't just roll over on the issue. Think about it and strategize and negotiate, what you want in exchange for that. Somebody else, I think it was Elizabeth, asked, is there anything in the ER about utilities? No, there isn't, as a matter of fact, because, I personally have had a couple of bank-owned listings in the past. And sometimes there is no utilities. Now, we don't do property management here, so please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But it's possible on an REO listing that the agent would have to get power turned on for that listing. It would have to be spelled all out in the additional terms of the listing. But there's nothing in the ER. Now, I highly recommend as a best practice, and there's a video coming out soon too on common best versus basic practices in our industry. I'll probably rip off a top 5 or top 10 list, but it's going to be a best practice if you don't want to be responsible for that component to put right in the additional term section of the ER. If the seller agrees to turn on the power or maintain power and water through COE? How are we going to show the house? How are we going to get through it? Because they do promise the buyer in the purchase contract that they will. So why wouldn't you, just like that owner obligation section, want them to promise you they will? I mean, that's just a good idea in most cases, especially on a retail offering.
No, exactly. And that's where that little bit of confusion comes, because they do promise the buyer that they will have it on. But again, that comes into the set the expectations when you take the listing, like, hey, when, you know, it may be off now, but when we get a contract, it's your obligation to put it in, or you might want to turn it on as soon as we list this property, something like that. So that's a great question, because that does come up quite a bit, what the seller's obligations for on that. But it's not in the ER, it's in the purchase contract right now. But as Todd said, it could be smart to put it in the ER so they understand that, and that expectation is set, that they do have an obligation to put that on, and it is on them to make sure it's on, regardless of the situation. Anybody have any basic questions on anything we covered? I know it's kind of a lot and kind of risk management heavy, but I mean, I'm telling you guys, this is what's made the phone ring lately, and it's consistently the same thing over and over and over again. So obviously agents are trying to make deals work for their clients, trying to win deals. And we want you to win deals. We want you to win purchase contracts, but we want to do it in a smart way that puts everybody on notice of what they expect and protects them. Because a lot of times they'll get emotional and they'll say, you know, I want to do this. I need this house. I want this house. I have to have this house. It's great for us to hear that, but it's also our obligation as a fiduciary. Like, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure, you know, financially, does that make the most sense to do it that way? And they may not like us, but you'll like yourself a lot more when you don't have a knock on the door from a lawyer and said, hey, show me all your paperwork. What did you say? When did you tell them not to put that escalation clause in there? When did you tell them that they could pay $10,000 over appraisal? Show me the documentation. And that's what we're trying to avoid, because that's what happens. So anybody have any questions for me real quick before we end this one? Nothing. Silent group.
Right.
I appreciate you guys being on.
I have one last comment, and that is that there's a few, we've talked about this in the past meeting or two, but there's a few updated forms in MAP. Be sure to go take a look at those. Most of them are fillable. And if for some reason you're not seeing what you're needing, just email the broker department. It's brokers@myhomegroup.com. There's a couple things out there, maybe that's new, but shouldn't be new, as an owner agent addendum. You got to have that. If we want any shot at any risk management or E&O protection, and one of the forms that's no longer up there is commission instructions, of course, which Andrew mentioned at the top of the hour, but also the pre or post possession form. We really want to generate a discussion about the additional risks associated and the additional requirements associated. So if you look on there for it, all you're going to see is a screenshot. Please contact the broker department for further information, because we want a chance to talk about that situation, especially I'm sure I could speak for John on this one. I'd rather do 5 post possessions to 1 pre, maybe 10 to 1. Putting someone in a house they're not familiar with, oh my gosh, there's just so much more risk there than leaving someone in a house they've lived in for 10 years for a few days.
That's a great point, guys. And like Todd said, everything's available in the office documents tab in the My Agent portal. And if you do have any questions, a form you don't see, a form you're not familiar with, something comes up, you can always email brokers@myhomegroup.com, or you can call the broker hotline or the agent helpline. Any of those will get you your answer, or at least we can point you in the right direction. Anybody got anything else before we sign off? Nope. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on this forum next month.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, guys. Awesome.
Hi, Tara.